There was nothing special about that night. No strange lights in the sky, no warning messages, no global panic. Just another ordinary evening on Earth. People brushed their teeth, checked their phones, turned off their lights, and slowly, one by one, they fell asleep. In New York, a man lay in bed after working 12 hours straight. His mind was exhausted. As he closed his eyes, he expected what always came next: dreams, fragments of memories, faces from the past, moments that never really happened. But that night, something was different. There was no transition, no images forming, no drifting sensation, just darkness. Not the kind of darkness you see with your eyes closed, but something deeper, something empty. Hours passed, but to him, it felt like nothing at all. And then, morning. He opened his eyes, looked at the clock. 7 hours had gone by, but something felt wrong. Not tired, not refreshed, just incomplete, like a sentence that ended too early. Across the world, the same thing was happening. In Tokyo, a woman who often had vivid dreams woke up confused. She sat on her bed trying to remember anything, even a single image. Nothing. In London, a student who used to have nightmares every night felt something strange, relief, but also a quiet discomfort, because for the first time in years, his mind had been completely silent. In Brazil, a child asked his mother, "Why didn't I dream last night?" She smiled and said, "Maybe you were just too tired." But that wasn't the truth, because that same question was being asked everywhere. There was nothing special about that night. No strange lights in the sky, no warning messages, no global panic. Just another ordinary evening on Earth. People brushed their teeth, checked their phones, turned off their lights, and slowly, one by one, they fell asleep. In New York, a man lay in bed after working 12 hours straight. His mind was exhausted. As he closed his eyes, he expected what always came next: dreams, fragments of memories, faces from the past, moments that never really happened. But that night, something was different. There was no transition, no images forming, no drifting sensation. Just darkness. Not the kind of darkness you see with your eyes closed, but something deeper, something empty. Hours passed, but to him, it felt like nothing at all. And then, morning. He opened his eyes, looked at the clock. 7 hours had gone by, but something felt wrong. Not tired, not refreshed, just incomplete, like a sentence that ended too early. Across the world, the same thing was happening. In Tokyo, a woman who often had vivid dreams woke up confused. She sat on her bed, trying to remember anything, even a single image. Nothing. In London, a student who used to have nightmares every night felt something strange, relief, but also a quiet discomfort, because for the first time in years, his mind had been completely silent. In Brazil, a child asked his mother, "Why didn't I dream last night?" She smiled and said, "Maybe you were just too tired." But that wasn't the truth, because that same question was being asked everywhere. At first, no one connected the dots. After all, skipping a dream, that happens sometimes. People forget dreams all the time, so the world moved on. But by the second night, it happened again. No dreams. And then the third night, still nothing. By the fourth night, something shifted. People began to notice a pattern. Not just individuals, everyone. Friends started talking, families compared experiences. Online forums exploded with posts. Did you dream last night? I haven't dreamed in days. Is something wrong with me? Millions of people asking the same question. And slowly, a realization began to form. This wasn't random. This wasn't stress. This wasn't personal. This was global. Then came the data. Sleep tracking devices began showing something impossible. Smartwatches, fitness trackers, medical sleep labs, all reporting the same anomaly. No REM cycles. Not reduced, not irregular, gone. REM sleep is the stage where dreams happen. Without it, the brain enters sleep but never completes the process. Scientists check the data again and again and again. Different countries, different labs, different equipment. Same result. REM sleep had disappeared from the entire human population. That's when the emergency meeting happened. A closed-door conference. Top neuroscientists, sleep researchers, government officials. The conclusion?
But functionally, something was collapsing. And then came the first real warning. A global neuroscience report concluded, if REM sleep does not return, cognitive stability will begin to degrade rapidly. Emotional regulation will fail. And within weeks, severe neurological consequences may emerge.
But what they didn't say publicly was even more disturbing, because in private notes, some researchers wrote this: the human brain may not be designed to function without dreaming. And if that was true, then this wasn't just a sleep disorder. This was the beginning of a global neurological collapse.
By the third week, the problem was no longer invisible. It was everywhere. Not dramatic at first, not catastrophic, just wrong. Small mistakes began appearing across critical systems. A train in India stopped 200 meters past its station because the operator reacted just a second too late. A cargo ship in the Pacific drifted slightly off course. No alarms triggered until it nearly collided with another vessel.
In a hospital in California, a nurse administered the wrong dosage, not because she didn't know better, but because her mind hesitated, just for a moment, and that moment was enough. At first, these were treated as isolated incidents, human error, fatigue, negligence. But then analysts noticed something strange. The errors were increasing, not in one country, not in one system, everywhere.
Air traffic control logs showed a rise in delayed responses. Nothing extreme, just a second slower. But when you're guiding hundreds of planes, a second matters. Financial markets began showing unusual volatility, not caused by economic factors, but by human decisions. Traders hesitated, overcorrected, made irrational moves. It was subtle, but it was spreading, because the issue wasn't skill, it was cognition. The human brain was starting to lose precision.
And then came the blackout. It started with a routine maintenance check in a regional power facility. A technician followed protocol, step by step, until he skipped one line. Not intentionally, his mind simply missed it. A minor oversight. But in a complex system, there are no minor errors. Within seconds, voltage imbalances spread through the grid. Safety systems tried to respond, but another delay occurred, another hesitation, and then failure. Entire sections of the grid shut down. Cities went dark. Not one, not two, dozens. Millions of people lost power simultaneously.
Phones stopped working.
Traffic lights failed. Hospitals switched to emergency generators. And for the first time, people felt it. Not confusion, fear, because something fundamental was breaking. Governments issued statements. Remain calm. The situation is under control. These are isolated incidents. But people didn't believe it.
Because deep down, they could feel it too. Their thoughts weren't as sharp. Their reactions weren't as fast. Their emotions weren't as stable. Something inside them was changing. And then came the tipping point.
A commercial airplane descending for landing. Perfect weather, clear runway, everything normal. Until the final approach. The pilot hesitated, just slightly. A delayed correction. The angle was off. The landing became unstable. Alarms triggered. The co-pilot reacted, but not fast enough. Seriously. The plane touched down hard, skidded, and nearly veered off the runway. It didn't crash, but the footage spread globally. And for the first time, the world saw it clearly. This wasn't random. This wasn't isolated. This was happening to everyone simultaneously.
And then the question changed. It was no longer what is happening to our sleep, but what is happening to our minds. Because without dreams, the brain wasn't just tired, it was deteriorating. And if this continued, it wouldn't just be mistakes, it would be collapse.
By day 24, people stopped trusting their own minds, not because they were weak, but because reality itself was starting to feel unstable. It began quietly, a shadow that moved slightly too late, a reflection that didn't match, a sound that had no source. A woman in Berlin reported something strange. She was sitting alone when she heard someone call her name right behind her. She turned. No one was there.
Nothing, but the voice felt real, not imagined, familiar, like someone she knew. Across the world, similar reports began to emerge. A man in Toronto saw his childhood dog standing at the end of his hallway. The dog had died 12 years ago. It didn't move, just stood there, watching him.
A teenager in Seoul claimed her classroom melted around her. Walls bending, desks sinking, voices echoing like underwater. And then, everything snapped back to normal, seconds later, as if nothing happened. These weren't dreams, because they weren't asleep.
Seriously, these weren't illusions, because multiple people began describing the same patterns, the same distortions, the same sensations. It wasn't random anymore. It was systemic. Scientists rushed to study brain activity in real time. What they found changed everything. Without REM sleep, the brain didn't stop dreaming. It lost control of when dreaming happens. Dream activity was bleeding into wakefulness, not fully, not constantly, but in fragments, short bursts, like glitches in reality. Moments where the brain could no longer separate internal simulation from external perception.
And the worst part, people couldn't tell the difference. Because dreams feel real when you're inside them. And now those dreams were happening while people were awake. The brain was no longer asking, "Is this real?" It was accepting everything blindly.
By day 26, the first collective hallucination was reported. An entire office in Madrid claimed they saw the same figure, standing near the glass wall. Tall, still, featureless. No face. No movement. Just watching. Security cameras showed nothing. But every single person in that room described it identically. Same height, same position, same presence. That's when fear changed. It was no longer, "I might be losing my mind."
It became, what if this is real? Because shared hallucinations should not exist unless something external was involved.
By day 27, people stopped sleeping peacefully, not because they were afraid of dreams, but because they were afraid of waking up. Because now, being awake was no longer safe. Reality was no longer stable, and something was starting to leak through.
Seriously, by day 30, the question was no longer about sleep, or dreams, or even the human brain. The question had become, what are we seeing? Because whatever was happening, it was no longer internal. It was shared, consistent, and growing. Across different countries, different cultures, different languages, people began describing the same presence. Not similar, identical. A tall figure, standing still, watching, always at a distance, never approaching, never speaking, but always there.
At first, scientists tried to explain it. Mass hallucination, pattern recognition errors, a stressed brain filling in the gaps. But the data didn't match because these visions were synchronized. People reported seeing the figure at the same time in different parts of the world, seconds apart. That shouldn't be possible unless something was coordinating it. That's when a new theory emerged, one that was never meant for the public. A small group of neuroscientists and physicists began asking a different question. What if dreams were never just created by the brain? What if they were received like a signal? For decades, this idea had existed on the fringe of science. The theory suggested the brain is not just a generator of dreams, it's a receiver tuned to a specific frequency. Every night, during REM sleep, your mind connects to something else, another layer of reality, another field of information, something vast, something unknown.
And dreams are what happens when your brain interprets that signal. But normally, this process is controlled, limited, filtered, because REM sleep acts like a gate. It regulates the connection, keeps it stable, keeps it safe.
But now, REM sleep was gone. The gate was open, and whatever existed on the other side was no longer filtered, no longer distant. It was bleeding through, into consciousness, into perception, into reality itself.
That's why people were seeing the same thing, not because their brains were broken, but because they were all receiving the same signal. And that figure was not a hallucination. It was a presence, something that had always been there, hidden behind dreams, now fully visible.
By day 31, more patterns appeared. The figure was not random. It appeared more often when people were alone, in silence, in low light, almost as if it preferred observation, not interaction, like it was studying, learning, watching humanity in its most vulnerable state.
And then something changed. For the first time, the figure moved. Not fast, not aggressive, just one step closer. By day 32, people stopped asking if it was real, because now it was reacting. Not to everyone, but to some.
At first, the changes were subtle. The figure was no longer always at a distance. Some reported seeing it closer than before, not across the room, but just a few steps away. Still silent, still motionless, but closer, watching, waiting. And then came the first interaction. A man in Singapore documented everything. He had been seeing the figure for days.
Always in the same place, near his bedroom door, standing, watching, never moving. Until one night, he decided to do something different. Instead of ignoring it, he spoke. "Who are you?"
For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the figure tilted its head, just slightly. The man froze, because until that moment, it had never responded, never acknowledged. But now, it had heard him, and worse, it understood. The next night, he tried again. "Why are you here?" This time, the response came faster. The figure moved, not a full step, but enough to change its position. Closer. And then, for the first time, he heard something.
Not a voice, not a sound, but a thought, clear, direct, inside his mind. "We are observing." He didn't sleep that night, not because he was afraid, but because he realized something far worse. This wasn't a hallucination. Hallucinations don't respond. They don't learn. They don't communicate. But this did.
Within 24 hours, similar reports appeared. Different people, different countries, same experience. The figure was starting to interact, but not randomly, only with certain individuals. Those who focused on it, those who acknowledged it, those who tried to understand it. It was selective, intentional, like it was choosing.
And then, scientists made another discovery. Brain scans of these individuals showed something abnormal. Not damage, not disease, but activity. Regions of the brain associated with dreaming were lighting up while they were fully awake, as if they were still connected.
Still receiving the signal, stronger than anyone else. And that's when the most disturbing theory emerged. What if this wasn't happening to humanity? What if it was happening for something
because the pattern was clear now. The more attention someone gave the figure, the clearer it became. The closer it moved, the more it responded, almost like it was learning how to exist here, learning how to be seen, learning how to communicate through us.
By day 34, the message changed. Short, simple, but undeniable. We are not new. And then a second message. We have always been here. By day 35, humanity had stopped asking questions because the answers were becoming too dangerous. The messages continued, short, precise, always inside the mind, never spoken aloud, and always the same across the world. We have always been here.
At first, scientists tried to interpret it as metaphor, a psychological projection, a shared fear. But then, new data emerged, and this time, it didn't come from people. It came from machines. Deep brain scans, advanced neural mapping systems, experimental AI models trained to analyze consciousness patterns, all pointing to something impossible.
During REM sleep, the human brain was not just active, it was isolated, completely cut off from external signals, not just sensory input, something deeper, something unknown. It was as if the brain entered a protected state, a closed system, sealed for hours, every single night.
And during that time, dreams occurred. Not as random noise, but as a controlled simulation, a self-contained reality, a barrier. And that's when the realization hit. Dreams were never just for processing memories. They were a shield, a firewall, protecting the human mind from something outside.
Because if the brain is a receiver, then dreaming was the only time it disconnected, the only time it stopped listening. And now that protection was gone. The signal was constant, uninterrupted, and whatever was on the other side was no longer blocked. That's why the figure appeared. That's why it was shared. That's why it could communicate. Because humanity was no longer shielded. But the most terrifying part was still to come. Researchers began analyzing the content of the messages. Not the words, but the structure, the pattern. And they found something disturbing. The messages were adapting, learning,
Improving over time. Early messages were simple. We are observing. Then we are here. Then we have always been here. And now a new message appeared. Different, longer, more precise. We were behind the dreams. Silence. Because that sentence changed everything.
Seriously, if that was true, then dreams were not just protection. They were control. A system designed to keep humanity unaware, to keep them occupied, distracted, contained. And now that system was gone, which meant whatever had been hidden was now free.
No safe place inside the mind. No barrier, no silence, only constant awareness. People stopped closing their eyes for long, not because they couldn't sleep, but because they didn't want to. because every time they opened them again, the world felt less real, less stable, less theirs. The figure was no longer rare. It no longer appeared only to a few. Now it was everywhere, standing in hallways, at the edge of streets, behind glass, inside reflections. Always still, always watching, and always closer than before.
No one tried to deny it anymore. Not governments, not scientists, not even the most skeptical minds. Because now there was evidence. Not from cameras, not from sensors, but from something more powerful. Consistency. Billions of people seeing the same thing at the same time, describing it the same way. That is not hallucination. That is not coincidence. That is presence.
And then, on day 41, everything changed. At exactly the same moment, across the entire world, the figure moved. Not one step, not slightly, but clearly, deliberately. It turned. For the first time, it was no longer just watching. It was facing, directly, at them, at us. And then, something happened that no one could explain. People didn't hear it, they didn't see it, they didn't read it, but they all knew, at the exact same moment, a single message. Perfectly clear, perfectly understood. You can see us now. Silence followed. No panic, no chaos, just stillness. Because deep down, everyone realized the same thing. This was not the beginning. It was the end of something that had always protected us. Dreams were never just dreams.
They were the last barrier, and now that barrier was gone, which means this is what reality was always like. We just couldn't see it before. And now we can't unsee it. So tonight, when you close your eyes and you expect darkness, ask yourself, what if the only reason you ever felt safe was because you were dreaming